welcome back, Doyle, and everybody on Periscope. We're missing Kevin tonight, but if he doesn't show up until a little bit later, we might be able to cycle back around and catch some of the things that he missed out. Otherwise, I'll see about catching him up separately. We're starting off tonight with listening to some music. I talked last week about the examples of reverb. That's where you have the reflections from all over the room, kind of a wash, versus delays or echoes, where it's like shouting into a canyon and you can hear echo, 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 as some things. So I'm using Spotify, and I forgot on the phone I don't have subscription, so I forgot you can only shuffle play. So we'll see what order after we listen through this ad. I brought together some examples from some Christian music, from, if you guys know who POD was back in the 90s, and then some oldies music, some Hillsong. So we'll see how well this shines through. And if you can't hear it very well out of my speaker, you can always look it up on YouTube, on Spotify. I'll list off the name of the track and the people playing it. So let's skip this. This is Lead Me to the Cross by Hillsong United. Do you hear how it kind of tails off? Like she's in a big room. Also a little bit of an echo in there. So that's Lead Me to the Cross by Hillsong United. Let's see what we get next. Youth of the Nation by POD. The guitars coming in have a delay on them, an echo. So that's that solid echo, 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 instead of the big wash. You hear that echo? Repeats, kind of going over again. One of my big pet peeves in sound is when people call delays reverb and reverb delays. Basically there's only going to be one name for reverb. It's always reverb. Delays you might hear as echo, you might hear it as feedback, but it's a good kind of feedback, not the screechy kind that you get from a microphone and a speaker. So reverb is the big wash. The other type, where it's a solid repeat, that's going to have the other names, usually called either echo or delay. This is another one by Hillsong, Oceans, the 9-minute wonder that came out a few years back.
God existed as sovereign. He was supreme over all. In Psalm 41 says, the fool says in his heart, God knows.
Have you heard this song before, Doyle? Yeah, we haven't done it here. Don't know if we ever will, but it is a pretty good song. Kind of floating through. This one has a stronger delay on there, but it also has a lot of reverb. When you mix reverb and delay together, you can tailor it to sound like you're in a certain kind of setting, like a concert setting, outdoor concert, an amphitheater, or a very small room. And that's all about choosing either delay or reverb, or mixing the two in some way. by the way, there's a song with, what's it called? The Ocean's Drummer, I think is what it's called on YouTube. It's, I posted it on Facebook recently, and somebody said they thought that it was actually a prank, like a setup video. It was the actual worship. But the drummer just, at that point, he goes crazy and he's doing all sorts of really weird stuff. And the gal who's singing has to keep herself from smiling. You can see that kind of creep into the corners of her mouth. But he gets weird with it. So, if you want to have a little bit of fun, you can look that up, The Ocean's Drummer. This is another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd, part 1. So it's not the one people know, this is like the intro. Again, there's that big echo, that delay. Very noticeable repeats. See if I can get. Oh, Doris Day. This one has a really strong reverb, silver bells. So it's not Christmas right now, but still, I like Christmas songs all year long.
City sidewalks, busy sidewalks,
Big sound.
holiday style.
Sounds like she's singing in a cave, almost. Did this a lot in the 50s and 60s. It's making a comeback using all this reverb, too.
Meeting smile after smile, and on every street corner, you hear silver bells,
She's got a really pretty
silver bells.
really, really nice. I like old music, so I listen to a lot of this kind of stuff. Let's see if I can just get the last one. Okay. Okay, that's not going to happen. I can't skip anymore, I guess. For Spotify premium users only. But the last song I was going to show was a song called Fireflies by a guy named Owl City. He's been around for probably been 5 or 6 years. I think that was his first big hit. It's just him. He does a lot of synthesizer kind of stuff and very strong, like robot voice kind of sounds. But that song starts off with a lot of echoes and stuff. It's really kind of an addicting sort of song, nice and mellow. Anyways, so does that help kind of help you understand the difference between reverb versus delays? Pretty solid. Okay. So before we got any farther with the mixer tonight that we're going to do, I wanted to just show you a couple of components that we talked about last time. This is the power head. This is what comes after the mixer. And it's just got the on switch and then volume knobs. It's really level knobs for the left side and for the right side. And that's all it is. Something that's actually good to know with this is a lot of people think that these turn up the sound from 0, but the actual way that they work is all the way up is 0, and then as you cut it back, that's lowering the level from how hot it comes in. It can always boost the level out to its maximum volume level, no matter how high or low this is set. But the lower this is, the louder that has to be in order to hit the maximum potential, if that makes sense. So this is really limiting how powerful, this is actually a better way to say it. This, as you turn this down, it limits how weak that signal can be before this makes it loud. So to hit how loud this can possibly make it, that has to be a lot louder as you turn this down. If you turn it all the way up, that doesn't have to kick out very much at all, and this hits its maximum potential. So that's something a lot of people don't know, and it changes a little bit of the way you're thinking when you set up a sound system. Again, this is kind of a set and forget thing. Usually once you're settled for what you need in your room, like our sanctuary here, you won't really change it very much. I think I tweaked ours like 3 weeks ago by 1 notch, because these ones are just smooth, but the ones back there, they'll like crank notch by notch. So generally they'll just stay as is. Now this is a powered speaker. This is used in conjunction with speakers that are unpowered. So basically they just have wires going inside straight to the cone. You see the cone that's in there? Right, there's one, and then there's another one. These work with speakers that just have wires going basically straight to the cones. This one has its own little power amp built into the back of it. So you would go actually straight from the speaker, or from the mixer, straight into the speaker. And you'd skip this because there's a tiny one built in. These are nice when you've got like a traveling situation. Maybe you set up for business conferences that use like a side room at the library, or a tiny corner outside at a university campus or something. This kind of speaker is nice because you have one less box to carry around. It's a little heavier because of it, but it's nice and compact. So it'll have its own controls for how much you're cutting it back, and sometimes they've got some really cool features on them. This one's pretty basic. It's pretty small. So this one, by the way, is I'm not actually sure how many watts this one is. They're measured in watts, how much power they can put out. I didn't check on it earlier. This is 80 watts. This is, I'm just going to guess, this is probably 1,000 watts, something like that. I think this is what we used to have in here at some point in the past, driving our system. We've got actually another one that was the one right before what we've got now. So, anyways, these are what stuff will actually look like when you're setting up a sound system of your own, or looking at someone else's sound system. Okay, so the mixer. Turn this around. So a lot of people will look at a mixer and they'll think, well, that's too much. I don't think I can ever learn that. Doyle actually just said earlier that it was like looking in the cockpit of an airplane, because they've got all the switches and buttons and knobs and I don't even know what you call those. It's like for the thrust on an airplane. Anyways, and it can be very intimidating because there's all sorts of controls that you can do, that you can change. But in reality, this is not very much. If you notice, this is the same as this, is the same as this, is the same as this, all the way down. So basically, all you have to learn is from this line over. So that's, 10 inches, 11 inches? Somewhere shy of a foot. That's all you have to learn, and you've learned the entire thing. So it's a lot easier to learn than a lot of people think at the outset. Again, with the back, a lot of people will look at the back of the mixer, and they'll have that same thought. Because just like you have all these knobs and everything, in the same way, back has all of these inputs and outputs. And there's 3 different types. Technically 4, I guess, because male and female. 4 different types of ins and outs on here. And there, I don't know, venture a guess, there's 4 and there's 16 channels. So immediately you've got 64 just over there. maybe add another 20, 30. But again, just like the front of this is the same as this, it's the same as this, and on and on and on, all the way up through here. So really, all of this you can just cut out. Learn this, you've learned all of that. Over here, then it gets a little bit more fuzzy, a little bit more complicated. But it's still not all that complicated, because generally speaking, each one of these little sets, they're kind of grouped together with these little lines. Each one of these little groups, by and large, just goes out to this place or to that place. So you could think of these groups as just a different destination. This could be that corner. This is that corner. But it's all basically sending out the same kind of a signal. Does that kind of make sense? How that's laid out? So again, it's a lot less intimidating than a lot of people think, just looking at it, because it's a lot of repetition. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's go ahead and turn this back around. And this is where your handouts. Oh, and if anyone has any, if you would like the handout that I have, I can send it to you. Shoot me a message on Twitter, tweet at me, I guess, because you can't shoot me a message unless we're following each other, or something, and I will pull that out and email it to you or something. So if you look in your handout, it has it broken down into 4 sections. The first section that we'll be going through is the channel in and out. Actually, I guess I'll need to turn back. Section are the channel strips. That's all these repeated rows as you go. Each one of these is one channel strip, and there are 16 of them on this board. Next is the master section, so that's this part that's all a jumbled mess that's different from the rest of it. And then the master in and out, and that's just kind of the same as the channel in and outs. It's whatever's coming into this particular section of the board, or what's going out, say, to the main speakers. So those are the 4 general sections, and they're really easy to get to learn. There's not very much to them. So, okay. The channel in and outs. So in a given channel strip, you'll have your main input, which is usually going to be an XLR cable. Actually, let me grab some examples. So the first type that we'll be looking at is the XLR cable. An XLR cable is the one that you first will probably be running into as far as sound systems go. If you're a guitarist or a keyboardist, singers also will be running into that first. If you're a guitarist or a keyboardist, bassist, any of those things, you'll be running into the 1/4 inch first. We'll get to that in just a minute. So, in an XLR cable, your 2 ends, they're different usually. This is a standard XLR cable. One end is the male end, one is the female. And if you're watching and you're in high school, yes, you might make jokes right now based on the descriptions and such, but it's just what it is. That's just how they differentiate. On the male end of an XLR, you'll see 3 prongs inside, and then that's going to be surrounded by a circle. So the inside, it'll kind of be, they're set up kind of in a triangle. On the female end, it's a solid block with 3 holes in a triangle. And that is to accommodate the male end, and they snap together. So you'll hear a little click if they're, sometimes things will be really tight. Some items like little boxes and such won't always click. But generally speaking, you push them in together, you'll feel a little resistance, and then it'll click, it'll snap. And there's a little button on top they have to push down to release it. So pretty straightforward, it's nothing real complicated. Just know that this is an XLR cable, or a microphone cable, some people will call it. That's usually what you're going to see running into the back of the board. On this one, and all soundboards are going to look different. But if you learn the basic layout, you'll be able to recognize the pieces on a new soundboard. Because they all have the same parts, they're just maybe mixed a little differently. So generally speaking, running from the snake, so we said last week that you've got your snake that has all the little inputs on stage. That runs all the way down to your mixer. It has all the faders and the buttons and everything. This will nearly always use, in the back, coming into the mixer, nearly always use this type of cable. And that's why this is going to be what you'll be most important to learn. Now the second type of cable.
We have 16 of these coming out of it.
Yeah, for this board. Right. A snake will have, to match with this board, a snake would have 16 XLR cables coming out as inputs to run into the mixer. That way you'll have a bundle like that big instead of 16 of these running 150, 200 foot. Cuts down a lot on layout. So the second type, a lot of boards will have a second type of input, and this is not going to be used so often for running signals in from the stage for live performance. A lot of times this is going to be if you have a wireless microphone. There's just going to be a little box that sits in the sound booth. That box will then plug in with this type of cable, usually. A lot of times they have both options. But this is a 1/4 inch cable, instrument cable, guitar cable, keyboard cable. Any of those words that you hear associated with it, that's this. Properly speaking, it's a 1/4 inch cable. And it's going to be actually the same on both ends. These are the male end. And so it'll have, oh, you know what, let me draw out for our Periscope viewers. This is an XLR. Let's see. Just make sure I don't want to get. This is how an XLR will look. If it's male, this will be a thin wall and then 3 pins. If it's female, this will all be solid in here, and then you'll have 3 holes instead. So I guess if we did this, it'll be, let's see. That's kind of how it'll look for the female. With a 1/4 inch cable, you're going to have your jacket coming up and your long cable going wherever. It'll go up like this, and then it'll dip in like this, and then come up. And sometimes it'll have a line there, sometimes it'll have a line there. That depends on what type of cable it is, if it's mono or stereo. Basically, if it carries 1 signal or 2 is the difference. And then, oh, that's what that was from. I bet you. This is actually a lot like if you have headphones. It's a lot like that. Those are an 1/8 inch jack. If you plug into a phone or MP3 player, anything like that. It's the same, just a little bit bigger. And this is a little adapter that we use for, we'll get to that in a little bit. But with one of these, it's just like you'd expect. Male goes into female. And then, again, you'll push it, you'll feel a little resistance, and then it snaps. As they get old, that snap might become a little bit less, depending on what you're using. It might be more of a snap, less of a snap. Sometimes they're darn hard to get in and out. Usually that means that it's not a good product or something's broken. So that's the other type of cable. And those will come in, this one, it's marked high Z for the instrument cable. The XLR input is labeled low Z. The only thing that you need to know about that is just that it stands for high impedance and low impedance. Not really sure why Z is a part of it. It's probably some physics thing. But it's important because that's based off of how hot of a signal, how loud of a signal your source is producing. A microphone produces almost nothing. So it can't have very much resistance in order to make it. The more resistance, less signal. So these cables and their systems are designed to work with a really weak signal, XLRs. The kind that uses the 1/4 inch is usually built to work with something that puts out a lot stronger signal, like an electric guitar, or something like, say, the wireless microphones that are actually plugged into power, right next to your mixer. So, those are the two inputs that you would usually see. Most often, you're going to use the XLR. Sometimes the other one. Depends on what you've got. There's often another one that's, on this one, it's labeled tape. And you don't see this very much anymore, but this one actually uses an RCA cable. So you see these all the time on VCRs, DVD players. They're even used on Blu-ray players for some of the higher definition signals. It's the same sort of cable. This is just it's an outer casing with a single pin. That's the male side. The female side, I'm drawing this back there. The female side is solid on the outside with a hole in the middle, and then it just connects. Those do not click. Those just push in, pull out, no click at all. There's no button to push to release it, nothing like that. And everybody's seen RCA cables if you've ever hooked up a VCR or a DVD player. Usually, though, nowadays on modern mixers, you'll actually see an instrument cable, kind of a jack, a 1/4 inch jack for that instead. But on this one, it's labeled tape. This is for if you want to send out, say, another mixer. If you wanted to mix a recording, you might use that. More often nowadays, if you're doing that, you've got digital stuff, and that wouldn't be the case. But sometimes you just want to send out a signal before any of your board has even touched it. It just goes right back out. So it's kind of making this into like a train station, a hub, just sending back out. There's one more that's pretty common, and this one is called the insert cable, insert jack. And that one often has, I don't know if I have a spare one. I don't have one. Well, this is at least close to it, at how it looks. These are for things. So with processing, processors, effects, things like that, you hear people talk about reverb and delay. There's kind of a secondary type of effects that are used to sort of clean up the sound. Whereas with reverb, you're trying to design it and make it sound like you're in a place or make it sound strange and weird. This other kind is to clean it up, make it sound more professional. The most common thing you're going to run into is compressors. At the most basic explanation, a compressor takes it takes the loud parts and it brings it down in volume so that you can bring up the overall volume. So in the end, your quiet points are louder and your loud points aren't too loud. They're not blowing people's ears out. So you kind of almost put a cap at your higher levels, your higher volume stuff. Like if someone's speaking the plosives, that's what it's called when you do a P or a T, where it's like a sudden burst of air out of the mouth. That's going to come really loud on the speakers. So if you can put a compressor on it, it'll tame those little plosives. Also, if somebody tends to get really loud and then really quiet, and you're frustrated because you can't hear him, or else no one has eardrums anymore, you can use a compressor to do that. Well, this takes it... I just did something that my wife hates, by the way. She hates it when I take a small thing and I expand it and explain a lot to get to my main point. So I'm sorry if anyone watching is that way. Doyle, if you're that way, I'm sorry. I'll try not to do that too much. What this does is it takes just one input, just one cable, and it lets you go out and then come back in that same cable. So the way it works is, remember when I drew the 1/4-inch cable and I talked about it, mono versus stereo, if it carries just one signal or two, what happens is what you plug into the back here has the type that will carry two signals. It'll send one of them out this side, and you do your processing and stuff. It comes back in this side, and then it comes through that secondary signal. So you only have one input, or one jack, but you can go out and then come back in. Does that make sense? Yeah, if you have the right wires, yeah. I don't think I have any spares. I think we're using all of them right now. But anyways, so that's also really common. That's going to be typically used on like a pastor's microphone, his vocal microphone, or if you have an announcement mic, especially, where you don't know how the person is going to be handling the microphone, if they're going to be experienced or not experienced, because that can be a big problem in churches. If you get somebody up there who doesn't know at all how to work with the microphone, they're probably going to have some pretty bad habits. Because in sound, a lot of times what seems like common sense logic, a lot of times it's actually backwards, and it's actually bad. So people's tendencies will actually hurt the sound. So usually the inserts will be used for things like that, pastor's mic, announcement mic that different people use, things like that. So that's all the ins and outs. It's 4 things. It's the XLR in, usually from a microphone signal or from a snake. The 1/4-inch in, if you have like a wireless microphone or a guitar going streaming. The tape out or direct out, if you want to record somewhere else or something like that. And then the insert, if you want to put some processing on it. Hi.
Hello.
Were you not wanting to start?
No, I was just,
okay.
I'm kind of interested.
Yeah, feel free to stay if you want. Right now we're going through, if you want to take one of these, right now we're going through, we just basically finished that first section, the channel in and out, and we're about to move on to section 2, which I think starts, it's a few pages in. And in this handout, all of these inputs in and outputs, they have little sections so you can read up a little bit more. And I've got pictures of the different types of cables that I just talked about. Okay. So now that we've talked about the inputs and outputs, let's just start briefly going through a channel strip's makeup on the front. Okay. So at the top, you're going to have a couple of buttons. Again, those are kind of set and forget sort of things. You do it once, you'll rarely need to bother with it. Usually you're going to see one that says pad. That just means it takes the whole input and it drops the volume a lot because whatever it is really loud and you need it to be quieter to work with it. So that's all that is. The second button, it depends on the mixer you have. Sometimes it'll be phantom power if your microphone needs actual power, like being plugged in or battery driven, but it doesn't have a battery in it. You can actually send electricity out through your snake to the microphone and back. Sometimes that'll be up here. But the thing that's most important for us to use right now is the first knob that you can turn back and forth. This is called gain. It might be called trim. It might be labeled HA. I think that stands for head amp, based on an older style of setting up systems. But they do the same thing. No matter how they're labeled, they do the same thing. Basically what they do is they take a variety of signals. I mentioned a microphone is a lot quieter than a guitar. A keyboard might be a lot louder than, say, somebody, I don't know, they're running a flute through a microphone. Really soft instrument with the flute, really loud instrument with real strong lows if you're using a really good keyboard. What the gain does is at this point, now that signal has been changed into electricity from the sound waves that we talked about last week with our sources. What this does is it takes that electrical level and it makes it stronger or it makes it weaker, depending on what you need. So at this level, all the way across from channel to channel, it's taking everything, your really loud signals, your really quiet signals, high and low, hot and low. It takes them and it puts them all in an even playing field. So instead of the keyboard player drowning out the flutist, because the keyboard happens to be really loud and vice versa for the flute, this takes them both and it puts them at the same level. So one's not overpowering just because it's louder. So then you can work with it more easily. Properly speaking, what it does is it takes the two levels and it makes it so that the electronics inside don't get fried. Because if your level coming in is too hot, it's just, if you imagine a circuit breaker, or older than that, tubes and what's the other word? Fuses, fuse box. That fuse can blow out in order to protect whatever's past the fuse. You know, you don't want your computer to fry, so you get a surge protector. This is kind of filling that role. It takes whatever's coming in and it brings it down so that there's not too much power going in to burn out the electronics. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then vice versa, if it's too low, then you can boost it by just a little bit. And usually they'll have, this one does not. I'm glad that we're not using this one. This one does not have that indicator, but usually they'll have either a 0 or a U. That stands for unity. That means it's not boosting or cutting. That's basically your 0 point. Whatever comes in here goes through the rest. And then your setting depends on how hot the signal is. So that's the gain. That is going to be your biggest friend for setting up in a sound check or something like that. Yeah.
Well, how do you know when you got to have them people?
That is a good question. And I guess we can hit it now and then we'll hit it again later. Down here, towards the bottom, this is labeled differently based on what company made your board, how old it is, how new it is. On this one, it's labeled Q, as in C-U-E, like you're queuing up a song. On most boards, you're going to see it says either solo, so it's like the only one, solo, Han Solo, or it will say PFL, which means pre-fader listen. When you push that button down, this mixer is actually kind of neat because it has something you don't see anymore, except on the really high-end board, analog boards and studios and things. Up here, up top, these are called VU meters. This basically tells you how much electricity, how much voltage is coming through. So when you push this button, Q, let's see, this one right here has a switch for Q. So then you would look here, and depending on where this needle's bouncing, it tells you how much voltage from your electric guitar, how much voltage is coming in to that channel where you hit the cue button. And so for that, what you want to do is you want to set it and find a standard on your board. Every board is going to be a little bit different. That's you just kind of got to figure out with your board. Read the manual; they'll make suggestions. So that at its loudest, at your singer's loudest, at your guitarist's loudest, it always stays below a particular number. On our board, I usually set it so that we call it the peak, so the highest point. At their loudest, it always hits -6. So on here, I would probably set it to hit -4, give or take. And the reason that you want to do that is so everything basically has the same kind of high point, but just in case they do something that's extra loud because they were playing quiet or singing quiet, this gives you extra space so that if they do get louder, you're not hitting into the red. You're not overloading the electronics inside and potentially damaging the components by giving yourself some space. Does that make sense? Okay. And this is going to be one of the things that varies the most from one board to the next, especially digital and analog. It'll be set up differently. Most often you don't see needles like this. Usually you see a row of vertical lights, and they'll bounce up from the bottom, and then they'll be tiered with green in the bottom, yellow somewhere, and then red for when you're overloading, basically. That's generally what you'll see. So red is bad, green is good, yellow you need to pay attention. So, pretty basic color coding our culture uses. So that's how you do that. In a typical sound check, what you want to do as a sound person, if you're a worship leader or whoever's coordinating everything, if they give you the go-ahead and the authority, hopefully they will. Because I think that's the proper way to do it, is to give sound check over to whoever's owning sound. Leave them in control for 5 minutes, however long it takes. They will tell the people on stage, okay, I want your vocals, your guitar, whatever, and they'll go across the stage doing this one by one. And they'll say, okay, you're good, you gave me your loudest, you're good, I set you, now let's go on to the second person. Give me your loudest part, whatever you're going to play in this set. You're really crashing it out, really singing it out. You go. And then they'll set that one person, and then they'll set that person, and they'll just go across from left to right on the stage, left to right on the board, however makes sense to you, to keep track of who you've already done and who you have to do yet. That's usually how a sound check will go. That's how we do it here. I think usually we go, from the sound person's perspective, I think we usually go left side all the way over to the right side, and then end with drums usually. When we didn't have drums for a while, sometimes I went right to left. It's however you like to do it on sound. You're in control, hopefully. Okay. One more reason that's important to do at the very beginning, because that changes the voltage going through everything else. Whatever monitor system that you have, if you have wedges that sit on the floor and they reflect up, they're speakers that reflect up at you, or if you have in-ears, just literally headphones that you wear that give you your signal so you can hear yourself and other people. Whatever you set with the gain is going to change what's coming out of that wedge. It's going to change what's coming out of your earbuds. So you want to make sure this doesn't change in the middle of a song. You want this, because otherwise, suddenly, if you have to turn it up, somebody might have had themselves already turned up, and you can have hearing damage very quickly. Very, very quickly. So this really has to be done at the beginning of every practice and left alone unless you're backing it down. That's the best practice, because if anything, backing it down won't hurt anyone's ears. And as musicians, ears are so important. I mean, Beethoven proved that you don't require ears. But that's Beethoven. Most of us aren't Beethoven. So, yeah. Okay. Does Does that all make sense with how that works? Okay. Same deal with any other questions you guys have. Tweet at me, and I will do my best to answer whatever questions you might have later on. Otherwise, I guess we'll just go as we go. We've only got a few minutes left, so I'll just quickly run down what these other sections are, and then I won't explain them, just give you what the sections are and what they basically do. And then we'll finish up with whatever questions you have and then be done. Usually the next section down from the game, on here it's this kind of, I don't know, turtle green. I'm not sure what to call that green. It's the lighter green because these are also green. This is usually going to be your equalizer, EQ. That's what a lot of people call it. Basically, this controls how harsh a sound is or how thumpy a sound is or how wonky it is, like somebody talking like this. If you have a little transistor radio, that's usually in the mid-range. So this controls the balance of how wonky, how sharp or clear, or how thumpy and mellow a sound is. And you have that usually for every single channel. On digital boards, sometimes you'll have just a single set of controls, and you'll have a select switch for each channel. You say, I want that one, and all this up here is controlling just that one channel. You can get really flexible with that stuff. It's really cool, but it's digital. Not everybody has it. Next section is the auxiliaries. These are used to send a copy, sort of a copy, of the signal to somewhere else. We run a line out to our nursery, so that takes one of the auxiliaries. A couple of the auxiliaries feed into our in-ear system, so you can actually mix like two guitars together into one channel. Like for us, we have the metronome and my lead guitar. We have all the backup vocalists all together. That's running through auxiliaries. And they can be pre-fader, post-fader, set off to recording. We'll dive into that a little bit more next week. But that's basically what their purpose is just to send off another copy of what you're working with to somewhere else. Your last section is called the fader section. This is where you're controlling mostly stuff that's going to be coming out of the house speakers, what people out here actually sit and hear. This is going to be how you decide, how you set up your subgroups, where instead of controlling 3 vocalists, you know, like an octopus is how I put it, you know, you've got all these and you like the way that they're mixed, but all together as a group, they're too loud or too soft. So instead of having to go like this and try to kind of hold them together, you can assign them together so you only have one fader. All your vocalists go up at the same time. Same thing for drums. You can set it up so that you can get your mix how you like it and change the loudness over here of the whole drum kit. You can do it with whatever you want. You can do it with effects, with guitars, vocalists, drums, all sorts of things. So that's going to be decided how you have stuff set up in the fader section. It also, you can change, yes, you can also change whether it's coming out of the left speaker or the right speaker if you're using that. You don't use that as often in live sound, but every now and then you might run into it where someone's like, the drums are way over on this side of the stage. So I want the drums to actually come out more from these speakers because these people are actually hearing the drums. They don't need to hear the microphones picking up the drums. So you might pan that off to the other side. So you can flip that left to right. And it also has the solo or cue for when you're setting your gain. That's going to be down here in the fader section. It also will have your mute buttons if you have them. It appears this board does not have them. So I guess you just have to drop your fader all the way down. But if you have feedback and you happen to have your meter set up where you can see this one is way in the red and there's a screeching, it's probably that one. If you have a mute button, you can just hit that mute, and if it stops, you grab the right channel and you don't have to deal with that. You can turn everything down and then bring it back in slowly and treat it with that. So mutes you can use for all sorts of different little things. Very good things to have. This board doesn't have it. Again, again, I'm glad that we're not using this one. So, does that make general sense for what sections there are in the channel strips? And basically what the function is? Okay. Are there any questions on all this stuff that we covered tonight? Any questions on it?
Are the top agreements basically set up before and left completely alone?
Good question. Yes. Usually your EQ is going to be a set and forget. So maybe once a month you want to just check on it just to see how it's sounding. Or if someone plugs in a new guitar in the same channel or a new vocalist picks up the same microphone, that might not work anymore with how you have your EQ set. Those times you'll want to be listening and see, well, let's see, that person has a very, very sharp sounding brittle voice. You might want to pull out some of the highs. But otherwise, if you don't have a change from one week to the next or one event to the next, usually you get it set up and then you leave it. So they're basically a set and forget. And they're not even needed to be checked every week like the gain is. Every session, I'm adamant, every session you do a sound check, if you can. Some people disagree with me on that. Some people think you can sound check like once a month. Or if it's not convenient, you don't need to. But I sound check everything that I can if it's a different day than the last time. So.
Well, now the Sunday before last, when no one was back here to control it, when it switched from you leaving to Alexandra leaving, we basically couldn't hear her because her microphone was turned down, apparently, not for her to leave. Is that those bottom things?
Yeah, that'd be the faders that.
You bring her microphone up.
Yeah.
She started leaving and bring it back down. Bring it back to you.
Yeah, and usually I'll print out. I haven't been since we haven't had a sound guy sitting there through the service because I'll do the check myself in the mornings or Wednesday evenings after the classes. But when someone's sitting back there, I'll usually print off a list of all our songs so that as they're sitting there through rehearsals, they can say, oh, she's leading this song, so her guitar and her voice need to both come up for just this song and then come back down again so they can write out whatever notes they need. Because that's fairly common if you have different people leading. Even sometimes on a different song, maybe an instrument has a special lead part where it needs to be louder just for right after the chorus, and that's it. You can make notes on things like that. So that'll all be things that you deal with down the way. That's that.
I don't know what it was, but something like that as he was going after when he got out.
Anything else?
But not like deeper or anything, like enough.
Oh, good. All right. Well, thanks for coming, week 2. Next week, we'll actually start diving in again to these other sections. And questions are always good because I've done this so long, I tend to skip over things every now and then that I don't think about because, it's become second nature to me. So I'm like, oh, that's a small thing that you don't use. You don't need to talk about it. But you do sometimes. So. All right. Feel free to take those home and read ahead if you like. And, or just for fun. I don't know if you'll be sitting in with us again next week or not. Take it just for fun. There's extra copies. All right. And thank you guys for joining on Periscope or watching after the fact. And I'll see you next week.